Hello, everyone. I'm very excited and honored to present our next speaker, Dr. ANDREA CHIBA, who is a dear friend to us in the network. Dr. CHIBA, ANDREA, is a professor in the Department of Cognitive Science and in the Program for Neuroscience at the University of California, San Diego. She's going to talk tonight about music, audition, attention, and education. She has, an extensive CV, which I won't have time to go through. But one thing I'd like to mention is a very close professional relationship with schools. First, as a teacher, a math teacher, no less, then as a volunteer, and finally setting up a charter school for many years and with other parents. Therefore, she can grasp, better than most of us, the challenges of education and translates this into her science, into her research. So ANDREA, once again, thank you very much. And please, let's hear you talk about this wonderful, wonderful subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And I thank Professors GUIMARES and Lent and Fogel for their organization of their network and for inviting me, and for all the other organizers also. Thank you so much. Today I want to give you a little overview of a global network of which your network is a part. And then go into a talk about some science that I think is particularly fun and relevant to this group. So the title of my talk will be Music, Audition, Attention, and Education. And I want to tell you a bit first about a global science of learning network that we're starting, and just ask you to imagine the possibilities. And your organizers have been imagining this along with us as global partners. In the US, we had a National Science Foundation that began the science of learning that was designed to cross boundaries between disciplines: mathematical and physical sciences, biology, social sciences, education, cognitive science, computer science, engineering, and whomever else could be a stakeholder in playing a role in developing a very, very basic science of how people learn. And the goal, instead of applying this to some of our typical work in biomedicine, was to take that model and build a basic science that would then be applied to education. And so many of us have been engaged in this science, and of course it was much more difficult than we imagined. And we decided that really we needed to learn from each other. This was a bigger challenge than the US alone could hold, or any one country. And we needed to understand what principles cross cultures. And so we started a global science of learning for education network. And we decided that the need for such a network was recognized, and I was given an award by NSF to begin mobilizing a global science of learning to address future challenges. And a series of meetings were held to align the global partners, beginning with Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Asia, Australia, Europe. And actually, your organizers, also your professors, were instrumental in beginning the network on their side, also with the United Nations and other organizations that represented the world, so that we could join up and try to help make schools better ultimately, and our child's lives better. And so in 2020, with the coronavirus hitting, we decided to accelerate the pace because we felt that schools would be reimagined, and we wanted to try to play a role. And Bob Wise stepped up he's a former governor in the US of West Virginia, and he was a national education nonprofit leader. And he decided that he would try to help us really lead this because he was used to large organizational challenges. So we've been moving on together and trying to make headway in this. So I want to give you, I wanted you to know about that. Now I want to give you some examples of science of learning from our own Temporal Dynamics of Learning Center. looking at the foundations of attention in a very different way. And so I first want to give proper credit to my trainees and collaborators who have grown up in the science of learning and are really far more creative than I could ever be or imagine to be. And each has an interesting background. Victor Minces, who was originally an artist going to art school before he became a physicist, computational neuroscientist, and then science of learning aficionado. And Alexander Khalil, who was a master musician and became an ethnomusicologist, and then switched to studying cognitive neuroscience and aimed it towards science of learning. And my current graduate student, Gina DeAndrea Pina, who's been doing a lot of the work, and she was into fashion and design prior to this. And John Everson, who's expert in rhythmic processing and is an established taiko drummer himself. And so how is this relevant, all these disciplines coming together to look at school children? Well, if you look here, this might be, although probably fake for the picture, sorry, but an example of students who are engaged. They're engaged together watching a chemical reaction. And that's a particularly fun thing for children because there's constant change, and change actually tends to be very engaging for learning. And if you look here, some are engaged and some are disengaged. And the child that might be sort of disengaged or doing his own thing may not hear what the teacher's saying, or they may sort of dance to their own beat, as we say. And so when we think about...
Sorry, Andrea, I don't think your presentation is not on. Can someone...
Oh.
Is it me or everybody?
Okay. So I have been presenting the entire time. And was the sound coming through and no video?
Yes, we see you, but not your presentation.
Oh, so did you heard it then?
I heard and saw you.
So
let's fix this.
In the interest of time, I will skip the beginning. And I really apologize. When I shared it, must not have registered and I didn't notice because it did on my screen. So let me try sharing again. And let me hope, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
All right, so this is where we skip to the science of learning, and I didn't want you to miss out on the pictures of the lovely people that I was discussing who helped with this work. And okay. So we discussed the children engaged, and we talked about children where one may be a little marching to their own beat or disengaged. And I wanted you to imagine for a moment how important time and timing might be for attention. So if someone whips their attention around very quickly, they gather the moment and they share attention with the instructor. Say someone delays their attention, they may miss that thing that the instructor is trying to teach them. And so our ability to pay attention, our ability to perceive temporal patterns is really adaptive to what we'll learn and what we'll take in from the environment. So here you have people walking across the busy China street. And for me, that temporal dynamic is much too fast. I'm always afraid I'm going to get run over or bump into people. But we need to upregulate our attention so that we can perceive the patterns and adapt to the pace that is going on there. Here you think about it, it's like, well, our attention and our temporal patterns actually guide our expectations at the next time step. What will we expect? So if you look at these two engaged in a duel, every little thing about where their feet are placed, where their bodies are placed, produces an expert expectation that allows them to engage in this very quick and very effective duel. And so the brain plays an enormous role in gating timing. And a matter of fact, timing is an organizing principle of the brain. So we can study the brain at the level of the neuron and look at the timing of neurons there, the proximity for one neuron to fire relative to another. and the order of firing will determine whether they strengthen a connection or whether they break down a connection. And that leads to the sort of plasticity that represents learning in the brain. And we can have these properties accrue at a more network level until we get what we call the local field potential, or EEG, of an area, the electroencephalograph, that allows us to have an ongoing record of the rhythms of the brain, which are very important for timing. This eventually gets to the outside cortex, and that's what we can measure in humans. The cortical electroencephalogram, which is well known in clinics for its use in assessing things like head injury and behavioral state, but it's very, very important for research. There's a lot we can take about what's going on in the brain from it. And so these temporal properties of the brain impact states for learning. So the human EEG is well known for its states, and information processing and learning take place on a background of these distinct cortical states that are defined by electrical patterns that go in rhythms. So when we're very, very sleepy, and I hope I'm not putting people to sleep, I can't see you all. Usually I could connect with an audience a little better. And you have these, what we call bigger or high amplitude, slower waves. And as you fall asleep, they get even further apart. And when you go to the drowsy state, it's a little lower amplitude and faster. And when you're relaxed, you get these spindly states. We're very excited and we're, fully awake, which I hope you are right now. We get what we call a desynchronized states, where we get lots of cells firing fast and we get many rhythms going. And this is really important because it allows us to catch more from the outside world. So it's like an external switch so that our attention can be externally rather than internally focused and catch everything that's going on. And so it turns out that the brain will follow things in the auditory stream very, very rapidly. I hope this shows up here, but these recordings were actually taken from the cortex, or the brain's exterior, from a rodent who was listening to clicks. So it's very rapid clicks. Click, 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 click. And if you look very carefully right here, this is the baseline state of the rodent. He was sleepy and kind of inactivated. And as the clicks played, his brain followed each click, 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 and then it kind of dropped off into this sort of like blip, wah, wah state. But the rat that was in the very wakeful state, alert and activated, you could see the cortex following every click, 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 with amazing, amazing accuracy. So that's the state where we get effective coding and learning of temporal patterns. So what does this have to do with teaching and learning? Well, if you have a child who's only catching every other word or only part of a phoneme, it may very well be because their cortex is not fully activated, maybe not, there are a variety of reasons, and cannot take in all the incoming information fluidly. Well, it's that sort of hypothesis that led us to do some work in school children. And we thought, okay, why not be in an activated state all the time? Well, it's really hard to stay awake all the time. That's expensive for the system. We expend all our effort, all our neuromodulators, everything. So in an inactivated state, and that's this child here, who happens to be my son several years ago, he was a little bored by school. And so cortical process of stimulus sequences are degraded. So the outside world, when you're in that sleepy state, doesn't mean as much. And when you're in this activated state, stimulus fidelity is enhanced by an activated brain state for all modalities. So a continuously activated state, though, is biologically expensive. That level of alertness, which was my daughter a while ago, is exhausting. Could be exhausting for the parent too. So we activate as we need it in order to adapt to the demands of the environment. So this is something that neuromodulators do for our brain. We take new information and we adapt to the outside world as we need it. And one of the things that drives our state is expectancy. If everything is just as we expect it, nothing new, our brain is sort of following. And when there's a change and it's like, hey, wait, that violated my expectancy, there's an upregulation of attention, and our brain goes into like, I need to learn this. This is new. And so it was not lost on us due to Alexander Khalil's hypotheses that playing music presents this sort of difficult timing and prediction problems where we might be able to study this. Because just like the brain, music is organized into nested timescales. So if you think about it, you have a target beat and bop, 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 and you have a player trying to follow it, bop, 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 bop. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's a little off. And that's a process where you have to estimate and reproduce the interval of this is about hundreds of milliseconds. And then you have to actually monitor unison with the target beat. Am I on? Am I off? That's about a 10 seconds of a millisecond time frame, and adjust following the interval according. And that's, I meant tens of milliseconds. And then you have to actually suppress, if you're playing in a group, everyone else's offbeats to try to follow. And that can be very difficult and challenging, and expert musicians do it fluidly. And so we decided that if you think about this, in the context of world musics, and Alexander Khalil was an ethnomusicologist, he still is, who was teaching gamelan at a museum school. And gamelan is an Indonesian, well, a lot of countries have this, but he was studying the Indonesian form from Bali and teaching it to American children because he really wanted them to have the experience that the Indonesian children had in synchronizing. And so he noticed that this really involved integration of motor output, auditory input, visual input, tactile input, proprioception, and had a variety of important processes that probably weigh very heavily up on the brain. And he had a hypothesis. When he was teaching the children, he noticed that he could select those children who had attentional issues based on their ability to synchronize with another. And he came to me with that hypothesis, and I said, well, we really need to test it because it's very hard for the human ear to keep up with everything and know that. And so we teamed with Victor Minces, who's a physicist, and built these instruments that were gamelan-like, where each one had an electrode where we could sense every mallet strike with both temporal precision and the amplitude, how hard you hit it. From all the children playing at once, we ran it through an audio amp and got every beat. And you could look at level of synchronization with the group and with the driving beat from the instructor by each child in the group. And so we did that with many different groups of children in the school. And we also gave them tasks that were very traditional computerized tasks of attention. Sorry, this is a little blurry. This is the standard Erickson flankers task for attention, where these fish go by the screen very quickly and children have to tell you when one is going the wrong direction. They have to detect a match, right direction versus non-match. And this has been very heavily correlated with their ability to attend in the outside world. We also queried the teachers who were part of our experiment. They helped us. Blindly, they rated each child on something called the SWAN rating scale for attention deficit. It asked things like, are they able to track things necessary for activity? Are they able to ignore extraneous stimuli, remember daily activities, etc.? Teachers would be interested in knowing that we also had the parents do this. The parents' data did not correlate with any of the attention measures. The teachers' data correlated perfectly with the attentional measures. And what we found was that the child's, we went ahead and analyzed each children's ability to synchronize overall with the driving beat or the group. And we identified through something you call vector strength, poor synchronizers and good synchronizers. So this is the phase of the beat, this line here. And you can see this child started synchronizing well initially and then got very offbeat. And if you look at the spread of his beats, they're generally quite off the beat here. And if you look at good synchronizers, they generally had their beats, their mallet strikes precisely around the beat. And so what we found was that children who are able to synchronize with the driving beat or the group varies largely, and that their ability to synchronize correlated with their scores on these standard attention tasks and with the teacher's classroom ratings. So we felt that this was not only like academically to standard contrived attention tasks relevant, but very relevant to the classroom too. And so we did engage in an intervention, which is an odd thing to call music in the classroom because it's something that was always in the classroom for years and then was taken out. So it should be a music reintroduction. And we did not go far enough for the kids to become better synchronizers. So we weren't able to test our hypothesis. They did get an immediate boost in working memory and sequence memory though, which was quite interesting. And we hope to do the test where we go far enough to see if we are able to drive a child's ability to synchronize with others, if that also improves attention. So, excuse me. So next, we had a thought, and we thought, you know, from watching the video of these children and their own synchronizing, we think there's more to this. We think that some of the children's brains just aren't even processing the beats the same way, that this ongoing record is not being taken in at the same time rate. And so we created a task that we first test on undergraduates, and we haven't done the child test yet. We hope to, but we will have to wait until we're done with COVID. And we had two different beat contexts, what we call a long condition. It's one temporal context and another. And the short condition was da, 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 da. And the long condition was da, da, da. And sometimes we would put a beat that was unexpected in the long condition, but was expected in the short condition, right in the middle of that long condition. And we asked the children first, the students first, to tap in a group to this while we were actually recording their brain activity using this nice wireless recording headset where we could drive the audio straight through, custom designed with our scientists and a company, Cognionics. And we built these little drum pads that had piezo devices so they could drum together and they tap together. And we assessed their ability to tap again. And we recorded while they were tapping, and then we recorded while they were just passively listening, not tapping, so that we could get rid of all the motor components and just say, when you're listening, what's your brain doing? You're doing nothing else. Some of them were just sitting there with the headsets on and listening. So we put a percentage of rare extra beats, 15% in the long condition, and some rare missing beats in the short condition to see whether the cortical response to these were different. And what we found was a more pronounced, so this is, excuse me, let me explain. These are averaged brain potentials into what we call the evoked potential. And the potential, this is up from 0. So positive deflection, and this is down from 0, a negative deflection, and this is the time. So at this time frame between about 100 milliseconds, we got a negative, and at 200 milliseconds, we got a positive to the deviant beat relative to the standard beat, which is in blue, and the deviant beat was in purple overall. The interesting thing was that we noticed on an individual basis, some people had a much bigger N1, as we call it, P2, evoked potential to the missing beat relative to the standard than others did. And we thought, let's see whether this correlates with their ability to synchronize with each other. And so what we found that, in fact, it was, and we looked at these other varieties, which I'm going to skip for the sake of time, but we thought, okay, we think that this mean magnitude, this N1P2 difference, can be used to actually create an index of brain timing to auditory stimuli and reveal individual differences. And in fact, we did that, and we ranked the timing response with their ability to synchronize, their vector strength, and we found a pretty decent correlation, actually. And then we took the middle out, and we just looked at the 10 best versus the 10 worst synchronizers, and there was an even bigger difference, particularly with the N2. And here you see it. These are the worst tappers to the deviant, and these are the best tappers. And so we think that timing response index may be a really good clinical marker and good for schools also, because it doesn't take into account the children's sensory motor abilities. It's just their listening. So it will give you, if you will, sort of a shutter speed for the brain. How quickly is it picking up things? And how good a change detector is it auditorily? So we're looking forward to going further with that. And so lessons learned from all of this: cultural practices should be studied prior to being considered extracurricular. We think music's very important, actually, and we find it interesting that it's been around throughout the ages, yet it was sort of ripped out of curricula for more reading time, for more learning time. And we need to understand how to build fundamental neural properties of the brain that optimize learning and contribute to education. And those may be academic endeavors, and they may not be. So although most academic tasks demand focused attention and resistance to distraction, schools don't explicitly teach attention, and it's a skill. And so it's interesting to think of what fun activities, what cultural activities originally existed to help group attention. Incidentally, there's some really interesting studies that have come out saying that synchronous activities actually lead to more pro-social behavior in a group too. So this may be more important than we think. It may involve part of our connectedness with the group and our ability to work together in harmony, quite literally. So we also need to examine common threads in cultural practices that maximize health and brain health in general, so that we aren't creating what we consider perfect education at the cost of really building a healthier individual and a healthy ecosystem for learning through other practices. So I wanted to give a free advertisement here. It's free tools. Victor Mises in our group developed his own physics outreach, listening to waves. He's been in the classrooms doing this and is now teaching teachers. And he uses music, which is very engaging to children, to study the science of sound and physics. And there are all these online tools that he's using here that you can download and use with your own students. And here's the address, listeningtowaves.com. And I want to thank everyone that contributed to this work. And I wanted to thank our funders and all the different organizations that have helped us out with the global initiative. And I want to thank all of you, because really it's those partnerships between the scientific communities and the education communities directly that help us kind of dream big for the next generation and work towards global good. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me. It hurts me not to be in Brazil with all of you. I was invited there a few years ago, and it's just such a beautiful country and a beautiful people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. It was great. We have time for some questions. There is one in the chat. Are there any studies that indicate how these attentional training last during time? Not so hard to translate, God. Are there any studies showing how long they last in children, adults, or elderly people?
No, we don't know how long they last. We think that, and we don't know whether you can play music for a short time and then it has durable effects on attention. We do think that looking through the literature, there are a variety of synchronization activities that require very fast interchange that do help regardless, but they haven't been studied formally. One of the things that we thought was special about the gamelan music versus other music is that it's interleave music. So one child picks up the beat from the other and it goes much faster than any one player could go. So it really drives your auditory processing. If you think of this on a motor level, something like capoeira would probably play off of some of the same functions. So it's super interesting to see what each culture has adopted that might help these things. And we think that it would be wonderful to study and know really how much for how long in the way that we study other curricula would be best for people to have in order to augment their capacity to attend.
I was going to ask you about that before I read the next question. There was a researcher talking about this capoeira the first day of our meeting. I was going to ask you about dancing in general. I remember my two daughters, they went to ballet school. And I remember the presentation at the end of the year, the hardest thing for them was not only to follow the beat of the music, of course, but also to stop and wait for the next move. So are there any studies regarding dancing and how they can help memory, working memory and attention?
Yeah, there are some studies regarding dancing. Interestingly, there are more studies regarding dancing and aging than there are in school children. And so they found that they have some Alzheimer's interventions where they have people dance. And it really helps their sequencing abilities and it helps their ability to stop and pay attention also. And there's some studies in children, very few that go systematically though, and very few that parse different types of dance for different types of function, which you could imagine. I know that just on the off chance, the picture of the child jumping in the air with the very bright eyes was my daughter when she was younger, and she danced actually, and we put her in dance when she was little because we felt like she always went to motor ceiling and needed to learn to slow down and hear others. And in fact, we felt like tap dancing really helped, but we didn't study it, directly.
Very interesting. There's a question from Roberto. If the music reveals the students with better levels of attention, can we use that to improve the, oh God, it's so hard to translate.
No worries. I feel so grateful that you are translating. I would be doing miserably in Portuguese.
I think it's one of the hardest things that people are translating like online. It's crazy for me. So can they improve their abilities by practicing the synchronization, etc.? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, that's the study we started, and we knew that their working memory improved, but and I have to say my group did the experiment for 3 weeks in the schools because that's as much time as the school would give us. And they were just heartbroken because they said, look, it didn't improve attention. It only improved working memory. And I said, when I listen to this, I hear fewer wrong notes, but I don't hear better synchrony. Did you look at their synchrony? And they hadn't analyzed the synchrony yet. And in fact, in 3 weeks, the children were playing fewer wrong notes. They were playing the sequence better, but they were not synchronizing any better. And so we know at the very least in young children that it takes more than 3 weeks to get better at actually synchronizing. And so we would love to embark on that experiment, actually, large scale, and look to see what benefits there might be.
And along the same line, is there a window of learning when we can learn this better and more easily than later? I tried to learn to play the piano 2 years ago. It was a disaster. So, but I'm not talking about synchrony, but something else. But is there also the same issue, let's say, in learning synchronization?
Yeah,
and getting better at synchronization.
I think that I think you can learn it at any age. Some of the aging studies show that. But when you're young, you certainly learn anything that relies on sequence learning better, including language, including sports, etc., and have to keep practicing. The thing that happens when we're older, though, is we don't learn it at the most basic level and as systematically as we do when we're younger. And because of that, we tend to have an impoverished experience because, you know, I always use the example of like someone learning to hit a baseball on a pitch. When you're little, you get it just barely tossed at you, right? If you went into trying to take that 90-mile-an-hour pitch, you would never gain expertise. And so it's rare that those of us who are older would really have patience for learning to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for 2 years, you know? But really that sort of repetition, it is an area where we don't necessarily construct, we must repeat. And that level of repetition is rarely something we're willing to engage in as adults.
It's true. There's another question in the Q&A. Oh, thank God it's in English. What can a teacher do right now to start implementing this kind of attentional training with their students? What would be the steps? Well, right now it's complicated. Everything is complicated, but imagine we are not in the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because in the early days in California, actually, the United States, there was someone named Orff who had developed a whole rhythmic curriculum for children. I was lucky enough to grow up with the Orff curriculum, and for the schools that didn't have the money for instruments, etc., which I went to one of those, they had these big charts for the teacher with rhythm clapping, and the whole class would do these clapping exercises, and you do them together, then you do them in rounds so that they were synchronized asynchronously, where you would pick up the clapping from the other. And it was very, very fun, actually. And, you know, you had to pay attention, you had to pay close attention, and the teachers would make fun games of it, etc. And I think it was probably a pretty good thing. You know, no one studied that, but Orff had studied his curriculum. It was based pretty closely on the precursors to good music learning, but he hadn't studied attention at the time. It was just incidental.
There's another question here, which I'm not sure it was from the previous session because of the timestamp, but the person asked if there are any studies with children with attention deficit disorders.
Yeah.
Regarding that.
You know, we had an interesting experience because we had lined up to do a study at a school for children with very severe ADHD. The interesting part was that the students were doing quite well, and they were already engaging in all the sorts of activities. They had martial arts, they had dance, they had drumming classes. And so it was already sort of an excellent population. So we didn't do the study there. We did begin testing a number of children who were diagnosed with ADHD. And so that study's in progress, actually.
Ooh, let's wait to hear about that. I think there's another question. I'm not sure if I understand. I think basically is, can music change our brain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of data showing that music can change our brain. Someone whose name is Frederick Dick, professor in the UK, has done a number of studies just looking at the motor maps for violin players. And so he's seen the motor maps expand for the hands of violin players. And we hope to see whether this timing response index is malleable also, so that we can begin to look at whether you can restore it in people who have sort of a poor notice of unexpected events in the auditory environment. And we'd like to also see whether that translates to language following also, because there are a lot of people, adults and children, who miss half the auditory stream. So.
I have another question. You in the US, you have a saying, a white man can jump. And here we have something white men can't dance. So is the rhythm, well, to dance or to play or to talk, is this something you cannot learn? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think in households, from the very time children are little, so we that the way you dance or sing with the child will set what they hear. You know, so in our house, actually, you know, we danced with the children from the time they were very, very little, actually. And both my kids actually happen to be dancers. But I think that early input for the auditory system is really important, just like it is in language learning. You know, immediate hearing of many, many different sounds in different languages enables children to later learn a language because they have all the phonemes. I think lots and lots of physical experience with rhythms and music enables you to, you know, be able to get into that sound. Part of it has to do with the sounds we listen to too. So our ability to hear a beat in music has to do with our culture and our cultural music and our language that we're used to hearing. So there's some beats in the Far East that I've listened to, and you hear the music and you want to put the beat in the wrong place, right? So that happens a lot of times when you see people from one culture trying to dance the other culture's music. They just put the beat in a funny place. So we always laugh. I used to play jazz, and jazz musicians used to laugh at how all the typical Americans would clap on 1 and 3 instead of 2 and 4 to the jazz. And you wouldn't want them clapping when you're trying to play because it makes it very stilted.
That's great. I think we have to finish, but I have one last question.
Okay.
About the time we're living and the pandemic and everything. We watched several people here talking about how the isolation is impacting on children, especially underprivileged children. Here the schools are closed in Rio, the public schools.
Ours
so
are
it's good
as well.
There too.
Everything's online.
Yeah. So no online here for public schools. At least in Rio, there's no online schooling, only for private schools.
Oh, okay.
So it's gonna be crazy, and I mean it's already crazy. And can you imagine in some way that we can overcome this huge gap? I mean, the gap that's becoming huger between underprivileged students and privileged students, with music, with synchronization. Can you think of a way that we could use that? And do you think that would help?
Yeah, so I have a lot of personal biases that aren't founded, by experiment. But what they are founded by the fact that music is one of the things that there's most ancient record of, drumming circles and all sorts of music. And so I think it was probably very, very important for cultures. And I think it's very important for people. And I think there's a lot of evidence in the rehabilitative medicine world that arts therapy is very helpful. So music therapy and dance therapy can be a very good way to heal emotional issues and anxieties. And it can also be a way for people to join together who wouldn't ordinarily. And so I think these are important factors that could be the building blocks of something good. I have friends who are out teaching the arts now in parks, socially distanced. And it's strange because it's something people wouldn't do. And now they have to be careful of bigger and bigger crowds forming. So you have to go out in advance and put placeholders so people don't get too close. And so I think people need this. And I think that music is always an entry into getting children enthused. So the reason Victor Mises started the music program that he did, Listening to Waves, was to teach really engineering skills to underserved children. And backing into it by making music has worked very well. Every child is interested in it. And he's gone to some of the most underserved schools where they really aren't interested in science for the most part, because they've had no hands-on learning. And they're very excited about the hands-on learning. They don't conceive of themselves necessarily as scientists, some of them, but everybody can conceive of themselves as a music maker. And then all of a sudden, there they are analyzing signals and learning about systems. And it's pretty cool.
It's really nice. We are, our carnival next year, usually February, March, is looks like it's not going to happen. But the next one after the pandemic is going to be fantastic, I believe. And we are going to heal a lot concerning these things during that carnival. Maybe you could come. Oh my God, Andrea, it would be great.
I would love nothing more.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we have to finish now. We have a little interval before our next section. But okay. I want to thank you again, Andrea. It was great. And hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you. Bye-bye.